By the time you reach 60, you are not a raw piece of clay waiting to be shaped. You have already been formed, fired in the kiln of experience, hardened by victories and failures alike. You have spent decades constructing a self, your habits, your worldview, your routines, your convictions. You have been through relationships, heartbreaks, careers, losses, and triumphs, and every single one of those moments has left an imprint on you. You are not an open book. You are a novel already written, with the ending approaching faster than you might want to admit. And so is everyone else. The person you meet at this stage in life is not a fresh beginning. They are not a blank page either. They too have decades of history carved into their psyche, and that history will not simply disappear because you have now entered the picture. Their patterns are set, their expectations deeply ingrained, their wounds still aching beneath whatever facade they present. The person you think you are getting to know is not a new discovery. It is the result of 6 decades of conditioning, choices, and consequences, and you are walking into that reality whether you acknowledge it or not. When two young people come together, they have flexibility. They can shape themselves around each other, adapt, bend, grow in tandem. Their identities are still in formation, their habits not yet fossilized. They have time to fail, to try again, to evolve as a unit. But at 60, there is no malleability left. You are not merging two streams into one river. You are crashing two mountains against each other, and neither is willing to erode first. Every preference, every routine, every small ritual you have built over the years will come under negotiation. The way you wake up, the way you eat, the way you move through your day, suddenly all of it is up for debate. And that debate is not an easy one because it is not just about logistics. It is about identity. It is about the fundamental question, who am I when I am no longer entirely in control of my life? People like to romanticize compromise. They talk about a meeting in the middle as if it is some noble endeavor, a necessary sacrifice for the sake of companionship. But what does compromise really mean at this stage in life? It means unlearning what has worked for you. It means dismantling systems you have spent decades perfecting. It means allowing someone else to rewrite parts of you that are no longer meant to be edited. And for what? To avoid solitude? To stave off the discomfort of sitting alone with your own thoughts. Even if you convince yourself that adjustments can be made, that you can adapt, that love is worth the trouble, you will soon realize that the other person is facing the same internal battle. They too have spent 60 years learning to function in a particular way. They too have shaped their world according to their needs. And now you expect them to undo all of that? To shift their life, their instincts, their deeply embedded patterns, just to accommodate your existence? To accommodate your existence. And what happens when neither of you budges? When your bedtime routine conflicts with theirs, when their idea of relaxation disrupts your sense of order, when their need for conversation clashes with your need for silence? What happens when all the small, seemingly insignificant differences pile up into an unmanageable weight, pressing down on every interaction? You begin to resent each other, not in loud, dramatic fights, but in the quiet erosion of patience, in the sighs of frustration when they don't do things your way, in the suppressed irritation when they expect you to change even as they refuse to, in the way you start choosing isolation within the relationship rather than confrontation because confrontation at this stage feels futile. You realize that the person you thought was going to bring ease into your life has instead introduced complexity, that instead of companionship, you have found an ongoing negotiation, that instead of peace, you are now managing a full-time emotional workload. So you don't have to sit at a dinner table alone. So you don't have to face the truth that you are aging and that no one, not even the person lying beside you, can truly walk that path with you. You are no longer a blank slate, and neither are they. You are both complete works carved by time, etched by experience. And when two finished pieces try to merge, they do not become something greater. They fracture. They break apart at the seams where their shapes refuse to align. Some will call this cynicism. They will say that love is about growth, about making space, about the beauty of adaptation. But love is not an eraser. It does not undo what time has solidified. It does not dissolve the person you have spent a lifetime becoming, nor should it. And if being with someone demands that you rewrite the ending of your own story just to accommodate theirs, then what exactly is left of you when the final page turns? By the time someone reaches 60, they are carrying not just memories, but entire emotional ecosystems. Decades of suppressed grief, unresolved conflict, buried guilt, failed relationships, childhood wounds that were never properly addressed. All of it is still there. And contrary to the comforting myth, it doesn't magically fade with age, it hardens, it calcifies. It becomes part of the architecture of the self. People want to believe that age brings wisdom. Sometimes it does, but just as often it brings rigidity. Pain that was never confronted in your 30s becomes part of your personality by your 60s. The bitterness you never voiced becomes the lens through which you see the world. And every time someone tries to get close to you, they are met not just with who you are, but with everything you've never dealt with. This baggage doesn't sit quietly in the corner, it seeps into your relationships. It distorts your expectations. It makes you paranoid, defensive, easily triggered. You interpret harmless comments as attacks. You replay past betrayals on a loop and project them onto people who haven't done anything wrong. You sabotage intimacy before it begins because you've confused closeness with danger. And the worst part is that by now you've likely constructed a narrative around it. You've rationalized your distrust. You've justified your coldness. You've turned your pain into principle. You don't say, I'm afraid of being hurt again. You say, I don't tolerate nonsense. You don't admit you've been emotionally abandoned. You say, I've learned to be independent, but the wound is still there, bleeding underneath the armor. When two people in their 60s come together, it's not just a meeting of souls, it's a collision of histories. You're not just dealing with the person in front of you, you're also dealing with their ex spouses, their betrayals, their regrets, their childhood trauma, their years of denial, their mental shortcuts, their self protection mechanisms, and they're dealing for the years yours. Love at that age is no longer just about connection, it becomes triage. You're tending to emotional injuries that have been festering for decades. You're trying to love someone who has built an identity around avoiding pain, and they're doing the same with you. It's not two hearts opening, it's two fortresses negotiating a ceasefire. You'll find yourself stepping on landmines you didn't know were there. An innocent joke triggers a memory from their first divorce. A missed phone call reminds them of abandonment. A disagreement spirals into a full-blown crisis, not because of what was said, but because of what it represents. A replay of something that happened in 1983 that neither of you ever experienced, but both of you now have to manage. Most people think they can leave the past behind. But when it hasn't been processed, it doesn't stay in the past. It shows up disguised as personality. Suddenly, their anxiety looks like a being detail-oriented. Their need for control masquerades as a high standards. Their fear of being emotionally open becomes a just the way I am. And you start to realize that what you're falling in love with might not even be a person. It's a defense mechanism wearing human skin. People will say everyone has baggage, and that's true. But the difference is when you're young, the bags are lighter. You're still willing to unpack them. You still believe it's possible to sort through the mess. But later in life, most people have locked the luggage and thrown away the key. They don't want help unpacking. They want someone who won't question the weight of it. And so you end up walking on eggshells. You try not to trigger them. You downplay your own needs to avoid their reactions. You become careful, calculating, emotionally cautious, so that the relationship becomes less about truth and more about stability. Not love, but maintenance, not fire, but truce. What's dangerous is that they often don't even know they're doing it. They think their trauma is insight. They confuse numbness with maturity. They believe cynicism is realism. And when you suggest otherwise, when you shine even the slightest light on their unresolved pain, they recoil or lash out or retreat completely. Because acknowledging it would mean unraveling the entire structure of who they've become. You can't love someone's pain out of them. You can't undo 30 years of repression with gentle words and patience. You can't carry their bags for them without injuring your own back. And you'll notice that the more you try, the more they resist, because the baggage has become part of their identity, and losing it feels like death. People tend to panic when they feel lonely, as if it's a sign that something has gone terribly wrong. The silence becomes unbearable. The empty house feels like a threat. The lack of conversation starts to feel like suffocation. And in that panic, people rush to fill the void. They look for a partner, for distractions, for anything that will silence the echo. But loneliness isn't a crisis. It's a signal. And like all signals, it demands to be understood before it's solved. The culture has sold us a lie that to be alone is to be deficient, that a life without constant companionship is somehow half lived, that solitude is something to escape from. But that narrative doesn't come from truth, it comes from fear. And fear is a terrible architect for a meaningful life. If your decisions are built on avoiding discomfort, you'll never grow. You'll just become dependent on whatever numbs the ache. Loneliness is not a punishment, it's a mirror. It shows you what's there when no one else is around to distract you from yourself. It's the raw, unfiltered experience of your own consciousness. And most people can't tolerate that. They've spent decades hiding inside roles, the parent, the spouse, the worker, the caregiver. And when those roles fall away, they realize they don't know who's left underneath. That's why so many people scramble to find a new partner the moment they lose one, not because they're ready to love again, but because they can't face their own reflection. The silence becomes a verdict. The empty space feels like failure. But what if it's not failure? What if it's freedom you haven't learned how to use? Because here's the deeper truth. Loneliness reveals your relationship with yourself. If you can't stand your own company, why should anyone else? If you find yourself boring, chaotic, bitter, restless, that's not loneliness doing the damage. That's just the spotlight showing you what's already there. And instead of confronting it, most people flee into the arms of the nearest distraction, hoping proximity will save them from introspection. So the real tragedy isn't being alone. It's being surrounded by people and still feeling empty. It's partnering up not out of choice, but out of fear. It's dragging someone into your life just to avoid facing your own inner disconnection. And then you call it love, when in reality it's dependency wearing a romantic mask. Solitude, when embraced, is a crucible. It forces you to confront your unfinished business. It brings all the ghosts to the surface. Your childhood wounds, your unmet desires, your failed ambitions, your suppressed emotions, they all rise in the absence of noise. And while that's terrifying, it's also the only space where transformation is possible. No one evolves in the middle of a crowd. Growth happens in the desert, not the parade. But that takes courage. It takes sitting in the discomfort without trying to sedate it. It takes resisting the urge to fill every empty moment with noise, movement, stimulation. It takes letting the ache speak instead of silencing it. Because that ache has information. It's telling you what you've ignored, what you've lost, what you need, not from others, but from yourself. People think loneliness is a void, but it's really a doorway, a threshold between the life you've constructed and the truth that lives beneath it. It asks you to strip away the personas, the performances, the roles you've played for so long. It doesn't want your resume. It wants your essence. And most people don't know how to find it without a script. This is why so many late life relationships fail. Not because people are incapable of love, but because they are unwilling to do the inner work first. They treat loneliness as a fire to escape, not a fire to walk through. They look for someone else to bring them peace, when peace has to be claimed within. You can't outsource your soul to another person and expect wholeness in return. There is a profound difference between choosing a partner out of love and grabbing one out of fear. And you know the difference because one feels like expansion and the other feels like hiding. One opens your world, the other merely shields you from your own. And when you haven't faced yourself fully, you will always enter the relationship asking the other person to carry what you refuse to hold. There's a kind of loneliness that comes from not knowing who you are when the room is quiet. That is not solved by company. That is solved by excavation, by solitude that is chosen, not endured, by stillness that is allowed, not avoided. Until then, every relationship becomes a mask, and every connection a distraction from the deeper invitation underneath it all. There's a kind of comfort that doesn't heal. It numbs. It doesn't make you whole. It sedates you. And many people, especially later in life, chase exactly that kind of comfort. They find someone not because that person brings clarity, depth, or vitality, but because the presence of another human creates the illusion that everything is okay. That illusion is powerful, and it is dangerous. The drive for security intensifies with age. After decades of unpredictability, loss, and disappointment, people start to crave predictability like oxygen. They want routine, they want familiarity, they want something or someone to anchor them against the chaos of time. And often that leads them to settle, not just in their relationships, but in their entire approach to being alive. The tragedy is that false security doesn't announce itself as false. It feels stable. It feels soothing. It looks like two people watching television together every night. It looks like shared meals, quiet weekends, polite small talk, but underneath that stillness is a suffocating truth. Nothing is growing. Nothing is being challenged. Nothing is alive. It's comfort without vitality, peace without presence. When you stop seeking meaning and start settling for maintenance, you've already given up a part of yourself. You no longer ask the hard questions. You no longer stretch. You no longer wrestle with the unknown. You trade aliveness for control, and you wrap yourself in a relationship that functions more like insulation than connection. People mistake that insulation for love. But love is not what asks you to sleepwalk through your final decades. Love is what keeps you alert, what confronts you with yourself, what refuses to let you coast. And most people don't want that. Not really. They want someone who won't disturb the fragile balance they've constructed to keep reality at bay. False security looks like companionship, but it operates like avoidance. You avoid the fear of death by pretending you're not alone. You avoid the fear of irrelevance by remaining necessary to someone, even if only superficially. You avoid the fear of meaninglessness by repeating rituals that imitate purpose. It's a quiet, sterile existence protected from pain and completely void of risk. But without risk, there is no depth. Without the possibility of loss, there is no real connection. And the irony is, by insulating yourself from the possibility of pain, you also cut yourself off from the possibility of awakening. And you don't even realize it's happening because everything feels fine, just fine enough to keep you from questioning it. There's a moment when routine becomes sedation, when comfort becomes control, when stability turns into stagnation. And that moment happens quietly, often disguised as a good decision, practical choice, a sensible relationship. But what it really is, underneath all the logic and maturity, is fear wearing a responsible face. This is why some people lose their edge completely. They stop challenging themselves. They stop creating. They stop wrestling with their inner world. They found someone who doesn't ask them to be more, and they take that as a blessing. But it's not a blessing. It's permission to decay in peace. The soul doesn't need comfort. It needs friction. It needs friction. It needs friction to burn off what's false, to sharpen what's dull, to expose what's been buried. And when that process is avoided in the name of a peace, what you're really doing is sedating the very part of you that's capable of transformation. You're anesthetizing your potential under the guise of emotional safety. False security offers something very seductive, the promise that you'll never have to face yourself fully again, that someone else will hold the mirror for you, but never too close, that you can glide into the final chapters of your life without disruption. But the cost of that sedation is your soul's alertness, your ability to feel something real, your capacity to evolve even when the world tells you it's too late. When you're no longer willing to risk being shaken, you stop being capable of being moved. And eventually, even the security you thought you had begins to rot from within, because anything kept in place too long starts to die. Doesn't scream. It doesn't. It just fades slowly beneath the surface where no one is looking. Time is not just something you spend. It's something you become. The shape of your life is built hour by hour, decision by decision. What you give your attention to, what you allow into your schedule, what you prioritize, those aren't neutral choices. They are declarations. They reveal what you believe is worthy of your life force. And at 60, you know exactly how finite that force really is. The illusion of endless time is gone. You've already buried friends. You've watched your body shift, your energy change, your days speed up. The second half of life isn't some romantic encore, it's a countdown. And if you're still acting like your time is a disposable commodity, then you've missed the point entirely. People waste time out of habit. They spend it on conversations that don't matter with people who drain them, in routines that bring no meaning. They stay in relationships out of guilt. They attend events out of obligation. They say yes when they want to scream no. And every time they do that, they make a withdrawal from something sacred. There's a cost to everything. and time is the currency. Sit with the wrong person for 5 years, and you don't just lose those years, you lose what those years could have become. Isn't recyclable. You don't get to repurpose it later. Once it's gone, it's carved into history, and there's no refund policy on regret. When you were younger, you could afford to waste time. You had recovery space, you could stumble, detour, restart. You could stumble, detour, restart. But now, every moment is part of your legacy. Every day you wake up and choose mediocrity, choose numbness, choose autopilot. You are writing a version of your story that you'll have to live with when it's too late to revise. This is why your boundaries should become sharper, not softer with age. You don't owe access to everyone. You don't owe access to everyone. You don't owe explanations for your solitude. You don't need to apologize for protecting your time like it's gold, because it is. Every request, every invitation, every relationship needs to be run through one brutal filter. Does this honor my remaining years? It sounds harsh to say, but at a certain point in life, generosity can become self-betrayal. You start giving people hours they haven't earned, listening to complaints you didn't invite, offering energy to problems that aren't yours. And all the while, your soul is starving for depth, for space, for something real. There's a reason so many people in their 60s and beyond feel a subtle sense of resentment they can't explain. It's not just about being tired, it's about being spent, and not spent well. Spent on trivialities, spent on pretending, spent on managing other people's dysfunction. Instead of cultivating their own peace, your time is sacred because it is your life. And your life is not a rehearsal. It is not a waiting room for something better. If you don't treat it as holy, no one else will. If you don't protect it, the world will devour it. Slowly, politely, and without remorse. Even love can become a thief when it's rooted in obligation. Staying with someone who dims you, who distracts you from your own path, who consumes your time with endless emotional labor, that's not compassion. That's surrender. That's giving your sacred resource to someone who hasn't earned the right to receive it. People who truly love you will respect your time as much as they respect your heart. They won't guilt you for needing space. They won't expect you to compromise your purpose for their comfort. They won't see your boundaries as rejection. They'll see them as integrity. You don't need to fill your calendar to feel valuable. Busyness is not proof of importance. It's often just a defense mechanism, a way to avoid the deeper questions. But silence reveals what motion hides. And when you stop running from yourself, you realize that some of the richest moments in life are the quietest. There is a cost to every yes. And it's measured in what you had to say no to in order to make space for it. So ask yourself, is this worth it? Is this worthy of the precious hours I'll never get back? Am I saying yes to this because I truly want it, or because I'm afraid of what it might mean to decline? Your time is your essence in motion. It's not just about how long you live. It's about what you're alive for. Every hour spent misaligned is a betrayal of the self that still remembers why you're here in the first place. There is a point in life where you must confront a truth that most people spend their entire existence avoiding. You will leave this world alone, not as part of a couple, not as someone's partner, someone's spouse, someone's other half. Just you with your thoughts, your regrets, your unfinished business, and whatever remains of the person you were meant to become. People spend decades weaving their identity into someone else's. They define themselves by their relationships, their roles, their togetherness. They become part of a we so completely that they forget how to exist as an I. And at first that feels like devotion, like love, like the highest form of commitment. But what it really is, more often than not, is erosion. A slow dissolving of the self into something that feels safer, less exposed, more tolerable than standing alone. But what happens when the we disappears? When the person who made up the other half of your identity is no longer there? What happens when you're left standing decades later, realizing you never truly learned how to live as yourself? What happens is terror, panic, a feeling of disorientation so profound that people would rather attach themselves to anyone, than face the empty space they've been avoiding for years. This is why so many people rush into relationships late in life, not because they are in love, but because they are in fear. Fear of being alone with thoughts they don't recognize. Fear of having no one to reflect their existence back to them. Fear of the silence that comes when your identity isn't being held up by someone else's presence. And instead of standing in that fear, learning from it, they sedate it with another person, another distraction, Another chance to delay the inevitable confrontation with themselves. You can't afford that. Because sooner or later, you will have to die as an individual. And if you have spent your entire life being nothing more than a fragment of a partnership, that moment will feel like the unraveling of everything. You will realize too late that you never truly belonged to yourself. you, you only ever existed in relation to others. And that is a tragedy far worse than loneliness. This is not an argument against love. It is not a rejection of companionship, of partnership, of the deep, irreplaceable value of human connection. It is a warning against the lie that being with someone means losing yourself. That true commitment means self abandonment. That love requires erasure. It doesn't. And if it does, it isn't love, it's dependency wrapped in romance. If you have spent decades as part of a we, then now is the time to remember who you are. Not just what you like or dislike, not just your habits and routines, but the essence of you. The part of you that existed before relationships, before obligations, before you became what was expected of you. That part of you is still there, buried maybe, muted, distant, but not gone. The great mistake people make is believing they have all the time in the world to rediscover themselves, that they will get around to it when life slows down. But life is slowing down. But life is slowing down. The years are passing, and every moment you refuse to reclaim yourself as a moment you will never get back. A moment lost to someone else's story instead of your own. There is nothing more terrifying than reaching the end of your life and realizing you never truly lived as yourself. That every choice was made in relation to someone else. That you have spent years bending, shrinking, adjusting, adapting. So much so that when you finally stand alone, you don't even recognize the person in the mirror. You must prepare for your death the way you should have prepared for your life, as an individual, not as a wife, husband, partner, or plus one, but as you, whole, sovereign, not an extension of another person, but a full and complete being, capable of standing alone in the face of the unknown without needing someone else to make it feel bearable. And if that thought terrifies you, good. It means there is work to do. It means there are parts of yourself you have neglected for far too long. It means you have spent years avoiding the weight of your own existence by distributing it across a relationship. And now finally, it is time to take it back. Because when the final moment comes, there will be no hand to hold, no presence to lean on, no external identity to cling to, just you. Just the weight of your own soul standing on the edge of eternity, left with nothing but the question that should have guided your entire life. Did you ever truly belong to yourself?